Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Happy 4th of July.
Happy Tuesday with the bang bangs and the pew pews up in the air.
All right. If you weren't sleeping well enough already, you're going to have all the fireworks late at night. There's always someone who's launching fireworks at the end of 4th of July, and it's like, oh, 10 o'clock. I heard a couple. Okay, 11 o'clock. There's another couple. Who's launching fireworks at 11 at night, like midnight? Like, okay, people, it's been dark for hours now. We can stop already. I want to go to bed.
Waking up my kids, go back to bed.
I know.
That is the thing, man.
I know.
Like having kids completely changes like,
everything.
The late night shooting of fireworks.
Yes.
Like this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And when you have kids, you're like, I swear to God, I'm going to walk down to the neighbor's house. He's going to beat down.
Exactly. Let's start off with a quick intro. So for those who are listening, this is a pre-recorded episode. We did not get up early on July 4th to run the episode, but we will play it for you. So just FYI, this is a recorded episode.
Yeah, if you are watching live right now, feel free, and you win a prize. You could submit a mailbag, and that's now available.
Yeah. We're all still sleeping in because, 4th of July for us started on July 3rd. So, because it was a weekend. So we've been partying hard from the 3rd all the way on. So that's probably why we're still all sleeping somewhere. Excellent.
Sleeping somewhere. Hopefully not the gutter.
Hopefully not the gutter. Hopefully in our own beds.
I mean, I think we've graduated from those levels, but
I hope so.
I like to think that.
You can always have a bad day. I don't know. All right. So moving in. There's an article here from Formu, which will be in the description of the video. And Gilbert talks about a feature that I'm very much a fan of. If you write Python, if you like this graphical interface of Power Query, when you start working things in Fabric, you have this ability to create some notebooks. A notebook is basically you could think of it like cells of commands that you can stitch together, like, command after command after command. You can kind of use data transformations. So this is a very common thing when you do data science or when you work with Python. There's these Jupyter notebooks that you would use. But the really neat option here is if you're in one of these Jupyter notebooks, there is this thing called Data Wrangler. And Data Wrangler feels a lot like Power Query. You have a lot of actions that you can do on the left-hand side, like formatting, adding a filter, providing like aggregation on certain parts of data. And then the Python, what you do is you basically apply these steps, and the same way you would build in Power Query, you now build in Python, and then it basically outputs for you the answer or the results of those data engineering steps. So you don't have to be a Python wizard to know, which function was I using? I think on one hand of this, I love the fact that there's a UI that goes along with this. On the other side, I feel like this is the best way to learn languages. Have a bit of a UI, an editor that does a lot of what you want. And then behind it, there's code. So once you hit go or inject code or load the code back to my notebook, it literally takes these steps and bundles them together and then produces actual Python code that does exactly what you were thinking. And I think this is great. I absolutely love this stuff. When I saw this feature, this Data Wrangler, I was like, yeah. This is an underrated feature that people are not talking enough about. It is so cool.
And what's great about the article too is what Formu is doing is he's actually applying this to a Fabric workspace, a Fabric One notebook.
Yes, correct.
Which is really neat, which obviously makes sense because that's what I'm really been impressed with Fabric and at least the notebooks is it's not like a limited type of notebook. It's full featured Jupyter notebooks.
Yes.
And I don't think it's really lacking any of the features or the capabilities. So any other tool that you want to use it in, you can use it. And with Data Wrangler, what a great way if you're learning Fabric for the first time.
Yes. And if you're also like, hey, I'm comfortable writing M or I'm in the Power Query editor, wanting to start making notebooks, well, what does that look like? There's a one button press on a data table coming from the data lake. So right click this file or table, say load to notebook, boom. A bit of code is written. Now you have a data frame from your OneLake. Awesome. Then you jump into Data Wrangler. Make some more code there. Boom. Couple simple transforms. Done. Notebook's complete. And I've heard actually some feedback from some individuals saying that the Jupyter notebooks have been running very reliably and pretty fast. as opposed to just straight doing Data Flows Gen 2, which has some bugs. It sounds like it's like something they're still working out some kinks. There's been some inconsistencies inside the Data Flows Gen 2. Anyways, great recommendation, Gilbert. Any other thoughts?
Great blog too. No, it's a great walkthrough.
Yeah, it's a good walkthrough. So I highly recommend check out that blog from Formu. Gilbert does an excellent job. Gilbert, I would say, is one of the. It's like a sleeping dragon, I guess. How would you say he is a hidden giant? What's the phrase? I don't know what's. He has really good stuff, and like you think, oh, and every so often I start Googling for something, like, oh, look, there's Gilbert. Oh yeah, wow, okay, this article's really good. Like he does a great job. It's like I bet a hidden gem. I think that's what I'm going for. Is like a hidden gem. That's what I'm looking for. Jeez Louise, I need more coffee.
Dragon, yeah. So.
Yeah, a sparkling dragon. You are like sparkling dragon.
It sounds like a wine from like California. When you hear what my wife got?
Oh man, I got this new.
It sounds like a bad July 5th to me.
Yeah, exactly what it sounds like.
Sparkling dragon fireworks. You know what?
What was I drinking yesterday?
Sparkling dragon again. Out of the box.
35% volume by alcohol.
Yeah, right. The Explosive Measures podcast, now sponsored by the Sparkling Dragon.
Sparkling Dragon.
You know what they need to create, or what Marco Russo, forget DAX Optimizer, what he's going to do. Notebooks for DAX would be incredible. Because you think about if you're trying to see like the evaluation context for each of the subnodes that you're doing with the calculated, like a nested calculation. Imagine having that as a notebook. So the first thing you want to do is a filter table. What comes out of that? And then you could write your next part of the DAX query. Then at the very end, it's just one function. So if that's possible, Marco, if you're listening, which you're not, especially on July 4th. Well, it's not a holiday for him. So,
well, I mean, I would also argue too, like they just came out with a brand new tool that's going to help you do some DAX optimizer. Yeah. So I think it's not far off at this point. It's not quite a notebook, but it's doing things to help you make and write better DAX as you go.
And I think it's possible because in Tableau Editor 3 with the debugger, where it goes through the steps and it's showing you the query. So you could technically take your nested filter or your nested calculation, kind of see the output. So
I mean, wouldn't you be forcing people to write every component of a DAX calculation?
If they want to, but if they want to see the output.
Why would you want to when there's shortcuts? And did you say, oh my God?
No.
Were you the neighbor that was going to come over right now? Was I disrupting your kids?
Yes, that's
why
Tommy.
Would you want to? I know there are 5 really solid reasons. I was going to say 100.
I was going to say 5 people in the world who would really want that feature.
Yeah.
Tommy being one of them.
Tom being one of them.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. I'm
moving on.
Back away from the comment. Moving on.
Yeah. Step away slowly. Step away slowly.
Yeah.
All right. Let's jump into our main topic for today. So our main topic for today is talking about roles and domains as it relates to workspaces. Now we had a previous episode called RIP Workspaces. So in our previous episode, we're talking about, this concept of like, now that we have Fabric, now that we have this data engineering exercise, creating tables, making more mature data for our company inside these workspaces, we technically have the proliferation of lots more workspaces, maybe, right? Depending on how we design things, like based on what kind of access we want to provide to generate engineered data inside our OneLake. So that being said, when we look at this ecosystem of, okay, well, how do we now rationalize workspaces and roles and people and what should they be doing? So we started on the topic, and Seth, you very wisely reined us back in so we didn't go on a large rabbit trail the entire time. But this is the topic to kind of go take that rabbit trail back up, and we're going to talk more about those details. Any other things, Seth, that I missed there that you want to do for setup?
Well, I would just recommend that if folks are the precursor to this conversation is our episode 225, right?
Correct.
Where we're talking specifically about how these elements are the same, like workspaces is the same name, but how do they transition and how are they different in the Fabric ecosystem with domains? And we kind of set the baseline for some of the pieces that are kind of significantly different in how it like reshapes. But part of that conversation instantly delved into this topic, which is very relevant, which is how do the people within these new structures work? Because is it going to be the same? Are the roles within a workspace going to remain the same, or do we have to kind of rethink about how this is organized and what are people doing within the ecosystem?
Yes. So I guess we should talk about very quickly. Let's kind of go through some initial thoughts here, right? Just jumping in the beginning, let's talk about maybe workspaces and what roles are, or as the roles are defined today, right? Today, there's 4 different roles inside a workspace. We have the admin, the member, the contributor, and the viewer. And I can't tell you how many times I've switched up contributor and member.
Yeah, right.
Every time. I have to keep remembering that the member role
is
higher than the
level.
contributor role. And I'm like,
same thing.
Yeah.
I go from viewing to I've a membership.
Yeah.
To I'm a contributor. Oh, well, I mean, you're a contributor, right? Like that.
I contribute. Yeah. I do things. Like it feels like contributor.
I'm not just here.
Yeah.
I'm not just here. I'm doing stuff. Right.
Yes,
Right.
I'm contributing to the workspace.
Every single time. I got to look it up every
time.
I am a member of the Sons and Daughters of Italy, but I do not contribute to them. So
yeah, see,
the society kind of thing.
You just kind of along for the ride.
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
be members of many things and not do anything.
Yeah.
However, if you're a contributor,
contributing, yeah.
Not only are you a member, you're contributing.
That's just like Seth and I being members of the Milwaukee Power BI user group, and we just don't do anything.
Yeah.
Wait.
Power BI.
Awesome. So, okay, so thinking through those different levels, right? So the admin can basically do everything. You can add other admins, you can remove people, it gives you full control to publish the app, all those kind of fun things. When we talk about the member, basically the member can do everything an admin except add other admins. That seems like that's the threshold for the member level items. Then when you get down to contributor, you start actually limiting what contributors can and cannot do. And I think at the contributor level, you stop having the ability of being able to create an app, but you can republish an app. Or is that the member? I think that maybe it's the member level. The members can only republish the app or update apps. The contributors can only make content inside the workspace. And then the viewer role, basically, you can't edit anything. You can't add stuff. You can't make things in the workspace. You are a viewer. You can look at the content that is there, but you can't do anything. My opinion on basically those 4 roles, the ones that should be used the most are the contributor level. Everyone should live there, and the member and administrator roles, admin roles, should be reserved for the central IT team. If you have like a central team that needs to govern everything in Power BI, the member roles should be the data stewards or the owners of the workspace. Like, for example, some organizations have the pattern of you can't make your own workspace. You have to request it, and then they will be given to you. Well, the requester becomes the member, right? They have control to do what they want to do in that workspace. But to me, that aligns with that role. What do you guys think? Is that your understanding of those different roles? Is there something I missed there?
No, I mean that's pretty spot on, because honestly, the viewer role is the rarest one, probably.
I don't know. Why would you ever use that?
Because
I would use an app.
A C-level ask for it and go, okay, kind of thing. So,
but that's still what? But why would I confuse people? Like, a C-level is looking for a single report where I can just show up and just look at stuff.
There are some people who are more tech savvy and they just want to see what's going on, and there's really no pushback there.
Didn't you used to report to like back in the day, Tommy? Didn't you report to a finance guy?
At one point, yeah.
Right. So this would be a perfect opportunity where like somebody who has no idea what you do is like, give me access to the workspace.
Yeah. And then at that point,
if you're a viewer.
If your CFO is going in and they just want to see, and I've honestly seen that more than once with someone higher up who just wants to see the content, but that's the only reason for the viewer. There's no other reason to have a viewer, because again, if you're doing things right, you're sharing things through a Power BI app.
Okay. So this becomes, so when I think about the governance of those artifacts in the workspace, this is where this becomes incredibly important, because when you talk about an app, you have this, and again, I think apps were, before you had the idea of a single app and multiple audiences, right? So that now I can have groups of people that can belong to the same app. And then those groups of people can see different objects that are published with the app. Before that, it might have made sense to actually have a viewer role, because I only had, I had maybe a lot of reports or a couple data sets in the same workspace, and I only wanted to publish a couple of them via the app because I needed to have another app from another workspace that I'd have to, man.
Then you share
Sounds kind of convoluted.
Yeah,
It was so convoluted.
right. And then the other two roles, I think you're on, where in an ideal world, or in a perfect kind of hierarchy, you have report authors or even the self-service who can publish to the workspace. That they've kind of gone through the COE, they at least know what they're doing, so to speak, to create a report.
Yes.
And
you
then
give them some basic training
exactly
to get to that level.
exactly.
Yes,
Or
agreed.
you have workspaces that are you kind of commissioned out there, but you always still have that from a governance point of view and from a culture point of view. You have a workspace admin who maybe not necessarily the Power BI admin,
Yes.
someone who they're responsible for the content in the workspace.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the things that's very important to note, especially when you're talking about enterprise BI,
right,
versus, reporting and intelligence that comes from the business unit. Because if we think about all the different artifacts that we have, and I think this is where I start thinking about, where does domains and where does Fabric include in this space? If we have a report that people can look at, that's supporting that report is a data set. So you can have access to a report via an app, but you may not have access to share, reshare, or build permissions basically on the data set. What that means is you can just get the report and you can just leverage or use the report as is, but you can't build your own reports off that data set. I think that's very relevant for things that are coming out of that central BI team. You maybe don't want a lot of people initially using your data sets. At some point in time, I think there are certain teams or other parts of the organization that you can grow them into. Okay, we've done the training. People understand what's going on. They're now becoming Power BI champions. They're more comfortable. Okay, now we're going to give them more access into the data set. Okay, so then let's keep walking further back upstream here, right? We make tables somewhere else, right? And that's where I think Fabric starts picking up the conversation here around. Fabric is now creating a lakehouse with tables in it and potentially a data warehouse. And there's SQL-based things. So this is one layer further back, closer to the source of the data. And now we have to think about, okay, how do we control those artifacts in relation to everyone else? So anyways, that's kind of where we now have these multiple layers of things. And so we're using workspaces as a control mechanism to give people metered access to various parts of our assets. And this is where I would look at today. We look at the guidance from Microsoft. Microsoft recommends putting your data sets in a pipeline, a deployment pipeline, and your reports in a separate pipeline. And then you can control the access to reports and or data sets per audience or per group or whatever you want. You get more control there. And now we add Fabric. Does that mean we need a third row of data sets? We need a third row of engineering data that's below this, like a Fabric deployment pipeline? You can't deploy a lot of the artifacts in a pipeline can't be deployed using deployment pipelines yet. So what does that mean?
Or they don't work with source control either.
That's also true. If you turn on GitHub or Git integration, which because you can only use Azure DevOps today, but once you turn on Git integration, you can't sync a warehouse. You can't sync the data flows.
You can only sync a data set and report right now.
Yeah, it's just data sets and report, which again, I will say that is a big win. I'm very happy that is working, but I would hope in the future that all of the things would be able to be synced eventually.
So with domains, we're considering a level up, and for the remainder of the conversation, I'm open to being wrong about this.
And this is domains now talking about in the context of Fabric, because that's kind of came out at the same.
Yes.
Now, are domains directly related to Fabric, or domains just released at the same time as Fabric? I don't see any language in the documentation that says, well, it does say what is Fabric domain. So maybe I'm wrong there.
You need a Fabric admin in order to assign a domain and create a domain.
So domains are a Fabric enabled feature?
That's what it looks like, because if you can't, a Fabric admin or higher, Fabric admins can create and edit domains. So if you don't have Fabric, unless
but didn't that just replace the Power BI admin? Like I thought a Power BI admin now just turned into a Fabric admin all of a sudden.
Fabric, you're still a Fabric admin?
Yeah.
I think they're changing the name of Power BI to Fabric.
this is what's confusing to me because it's technically Power BI. Like it's so interwoven now. It's like Power BI Fabric. It's like now one bigger word, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like
Fabric BI.
it's Fabric, or it's not just Power BI anymore. It's a bigger thing, and that's why we added our little logo on the podcast. That's because now we
don't know what we are.
We don't know what we are.
Identity crisis.
We're having an identity crisis, and now everything's green as opposed to yellow before. So now that's another thing. So, anyways,
but the Fabric admin can create and assign or edit domains. So that's the first kind of step, and that's in the admin portal. The domain admin can they're considered the business owners or the designated experts, and they say they should be familiar with the data and the areas of restrictions that are relevant. They can assign workspaces. However, they also have to be the workspace admin to do so, which I did not know. So a domain admin cannot assign a workspace if they are not an admin of that workspace already.
They can't assign a workspace to their domain if they are not already an admin of the workspace.
Yes.
Yeah, but if you're a domain admin, you can just add yourself to the workspace. If I'm a Power BI admin,
yeah, you can do anything.
If you can do anything you want.
But you can apply yourself anywhere you want to go.
Of course, yes, yeah, you have all the control.
Okay.
But if you're just
nuance, add yourself, add it.
Yes, exactly.
But so I think that really talks about who's the persona of the domain admin then, because it says they're the domain of the business owners or designated experts. So that doesn't sound like IT to me.
It may be.
And I think that's a big maybe talking point here. In my head, I initially thought of a domain admin as almost like closer to a stakeholder, closer to the business than IT. But I think I may have to pivot that, because that role, and especially the content in a domain, is not necessarily the data or the reports. It's really more the artifacts. It's the data sets. It's the lake house. It's the warehouse.
I agree. And I think if you think about the workspaces so a domain is a collection of workspaces, right? Is that what we kind of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the workspaces, we now have a collection of reports, data sets, artifacts, call them what you will, and then an app, likely, right? When you read the documentation, I like their description of the domain is like a metadata tag. So if something is attached to a domain, it's now quote unquote tagged with that type of information. And the example they give is like department based, right? So finance, HR, sales, right? Because those teams could be very large, and there could be a lot of workspaces that various teams or groups of teams are working inside those domains, which I do think is very relevant. And to your point, Tommy, a lot earlier was a domain is one of the reasons of the domain is the need to have one lake data grouped together, right? I can go to the sales domain and see all the artifacts or all the data that I have access to inside the context of sales.
Now, I think the wrong metaphor here, or I guess the wrong infrastructure, is thinking this as a folder and subfolder, because as of right now, it's really not that idea where I'm going to go to domain, now I'm going to see all the workspace artifacts. Right now, the only ability to show data or artifacts in a domain is the One Lake Data Hub. The domain has nothing to do with apps and has nothing to do with reports.
Yeah,
as of right now.
You're just saying the tagging is only really relevant for the data going to One Lake.
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you want to? I mean, I would think you'd want to see if I'm looking at all like. So hold on. If you have, my mind, that was just my mind crashing right now.
Yeah, you belong to multiple workspaces that cross domains. You're saying we don't have a tag or an understanding of which workspace which domain those workspaces belong in?
The only place you can actually, in a sense, see a domain in action outside of like assigning a domain is the One Lake Data Hub right now. And that will only show you data sets. It will show you It will show you like the data flows or a warehouse, but it doesn't apply from anything from a consumer point of view, or like here's all the apps now you have access to if you're part of this domain. That's not part of the gig, so to speak.
That's interesting. Yeah, you're right. So I'm looking. I'm just kind of hitting my head around this. The tagging at this point only lives at the data set level. And again, this makes also sense, I think, too, when you start having like, okay, we have a lake, we now have a warehouse, we now have a SQL endpoint. There's all these things now that come out of the build inside the workspaces. Okay, that makes sense. But I could also see a need here to say, what are all the reports I have access to that are in, like, there's probably another hub showing up at some point where we would say, here's the report hub by domain. Here's all the reports I have access to, irrespective of, or here's all the apps I have access to based on domains, based on what's been built from my organization. That would also make sense to me.
Yeah, and you can see the data set. So again, you still have that ability. If you choose a data set, you can see the reports in there. So if I'm looking at a data set right now, and I should be able to see, I can see the report, and it shows if it's downstream, upstream. But I still don't know the One Lake Data Hub, because that's right now, again, the only place that in a workflow or really just using domains actually applies. There's really no other place that a domain actually has an effect on something in the Power BI service. It's just simply in the One Lake Data Hub.
For now, right?
Yes. As of July 4th.
As of July 4th, that's what you can do today. Yes.
Right. And so I feel like that's a miss.
And what do you mean by that? You feel like it should be more inclusive than just the data sets?
Well, it should be more than just the One Lake Data Hub. I think there's a hope here, or the idea, because we've talked about this. I don't know how many times we've talked about having folders or having some better hierarchy with all.
Oh, we need it now more than ever.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to the data hub now. I have in a tenant that is just a bunch of, I wouldn't say trash, but like the Power BI Tips tenant, we just have a lot of junk hanging around. And so I go to the data hub and there's like pages and pages and pages of like sample data set, sample data set, sample data set. Like they're all over the place.
Well, think about your clients or the people you work with now. Does anyone use the data set hub, or do you still navigate to the workspace? And that's been my workflow. Like sometimes I'll go to the One Lake Data Hub, but that's not, in a sense, part of the process right now. And I don't know if that's going to be part of the process. I don't know. So like, you know what I mean? Because if this is the only place...
you are also a very heavy Power BI user as well. So I think things fairly much, like if it changes if I'm purely a report consumer and I just get links to apps that I'm consuming content from, I think the story is slightly different. And again, I think if you're talking about, you're simplifying some of that experience down for report consumers, they may want to start moving into a space where they could actually start consuming content from existing data sets. So instead of just being a report consumer, I want to start building my own reports. All right. Well, how do you start that progress? Well, then maybe you start more, here's the One Lake Data Hub, here's the data sets that I have access to. I can start building from them. And maybe that's more of that self-service BI training that has to go along with it.
I agree with Tommy, especially if workspaces traverse the ecosystem, and workspaces are the permission levels and sets and groups. Like within a workspace, I have data sets, I have data objects, I have reports, I have whatever. Like, just give me the same way you gave me like this really linear breakdown view, right? Of how everything interconnects. Sure. I have the full list. Give folders. Yeah. Domain, workspace, data sets, reports, whatever the case may be. It'd be nice.
Folders would be very helpful here.
I guess, and I think that too. Oh, go ahead.
No, like we're talking, ironically enough, in this one, structures instead of roles, I guess, to some degree. But I guess the question I have is, when I look at workspaces as they existed in Power BI, these, yes, to some degree, these were elements of consumption as we deployed a new data set and report, but it was very singular to a data set and report. I could always spool up to a certain size with one data set. And as long as I stayed within those parameters, all of my P SKU, like if I had an enterprise SKU, all of it just continues to work.
Mhm.
I'm not incurring more cost. Where this is interesting for me is like now we're opening up these same levels of permission, specifically around members and contributors and obviously admins, that they can now have access to all of these other areas that are going to directly influence how much capacity I'm using in a different way. Because if I max out capacities in a workspace, now I have to increase because I'm doing ETL loads and processing data and querying data. And I'm just like, to me, there's a shift here of roles and responsibilities for these people that they now have across this ecosystem. And I don't see, like, in particular areas, I see like in the SQL warehouse, it's like, you can lock down a user to viewer or contributor or something like that. So there's like
Right.
an add-on perm after the fact. But if you grant somebody permissions, they can go start consuming resources in a different way. And I don't, to me, that's the fundamental shift here. And I don't know if it requires different levels of permissions, but maybe it like, should it now offer different like elements of control within each of those permission groups?
Right. And think about right now the domain contributor, which I could see a role for. They have one ability. They have literally one ability. If you give someone domain contributor, they can, from the workspace area, assign a domain to them that they have access to from a workspace. That's the only thing they can do. There's no other, in a sense, feature or permissions that they have, which, okay, cool. But that's not, I agree. There's not really a role for that right now, or I don't really see that being part of a process, just with that being the only ability for a domain contributor to do. Also, I'm always concerned with documentation, if you dedicate an entire section to how to add an image to your domain, which is one of the sections here, I think we're still in a pretty preview mode of what's available.
Well, okay. Two thoughts around this one. One, the image thing. You ask me to provide you an image, but you don't tell me the dimensions of the image you're expecting. Come on, this is like so rudimentary. Like any platform. So okay, come on, Microsoft. This is preview, I get it, but like someone do their homework here. Like, what size image do I need to provide? Should it be an SVG? Do you accept a JPEG? Like nothing in there in the description.
This is more similar to me trying to do my 2-page report and just trying to do
an image. Just pick an image. Like, it's the Pepe meme. We're gonna just throw it on there and it's the boom done. So fix that. That's one thing to fix. On the other hand, though, when you start assigning workspaces, right? So as you start thinking about the domain owners, here's something that's interesting that I kind of like what's going on here. When you go into the experience around workspaces in this domain, you can assign them, and there's a little UI flow screen that says assign by workspace name. So I can literally pick the names of the workspaces and group them. Or I can assign by workspace admin. And I think this was talking to what we were saying earlier, right? Mm-hmm. If there's a name of someone who's an admin in all these workspaces, well, Tommy's the head of sales. Every workspace he's made is part of his domain.
Yeah.
So Microsoft themselves are pushing more towards this concept of there should be a handful of admins, and the admins really are controlling like a group of workspaces, and they're trying to govern them. And this is what I would see very well clearly called out in the adoption roadmap as well. This concept of really data stewardship, data ownership. It starts with the planning of workspace admins and workspace members. And so I kind of like that feature. I really like the fact that they're actually leveraging the names of the admins on the workspaces to start grouping them together, because that is maybe not a backhanded way, but it's like a discovery way of figuring out who owns that content. I really like that.
That's actually, and I think that's the story here that we're each trying to aim. We're own your content, own your data.
Yes, who's really owning it?
Right.
Yeah, and I think this also by seeing that here, it reinforces my belief that there should only be one or two admins on workspaces. Like we should really be focusing on when something goes wrong, if a data set's not refreshing, if there's a problem with the workspace, We really need to focus on a few people at the top at that admin level. And if you have if everyone in the workspace is always the admin, what good is that doing you? You're basically just, giving everyone all the access. And I don't think that's a very robust enterprise strategy that you should be applying to that.
And I think this goes bigger into the roles too, where, and again, in a perfect kind of governance world, I see that workspace admin, or at least some role there where when we say they're responsible for the content, they're responsible for the data. I've seen this as from a centralized BI when they're like, it's all blank. It's like, well, no one's inputting information, or,
Yes.
and there's that part, that governance too, where, your sales, well, you have to make sure that you have the stewards in place. And that's part of that governance side of things. And that's where domains they do make a lot of sense, because you may have, sales operations, the sales department, this, customer, B2B, B2C, whatever your organization is.
Mhm.
But having that in terms of, well, who owns all that, and not just who owns what reports, and if the reports have nice features in it,
Yep.
but okay, who's controlling the flow of that information?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, I keep waffling back and forth, right? Like, even as I think about
Waffles.
waffles,
Waffles with syrup,
waffles.
right? And butter.
Strawberries and whipped
Squirrel.
cream.
Oh, strawberries and whipped cream. You are a dangerous man.
Like, you think about contributor, right?
Yeah.
A contributor role across, like, permission across all of the interface, and the first thing I think is like, okay, cost, and then then I think about, okay, skill sets of these people, and then should you have a report contributor and an ETL contributor and an ML contributor, and then I listen to you guys as you're talking through who's the owners, right, of workspaces, of different elements, and I think what's being challenged here is like, are we going to find ourselves in a position where we do need finer grain control, or is this an exercise in like, listen, we need to stop with like segmenting people and allowing them to solve problems across the spectrum if they're going to engage, and obviously they have the responsibility of capacity usage. Obviously, they should understand what they're doing before they do something. But that's part of the organization's responsibility to teach these people what to do within that ecosystem.
That's the center of excellence. The center of excellence
Right.
is expected to teach people these things so that when but they need to define that policy.
But taking that same challenge I have in thinking about what has been very segmented roles, very segmented permissions to different areas of the data organization based on those roles. Fabric, it challenges that because now it's an ecosystem that they can easily traverse. The other point to dovetail onto what you guys were talking is, as you were discussing ownership of workspaces, ownership of domains, like the first notes I started typing were, man, all this is going to allow, is this going to pigeonhole organizations, because you're going to just dig deeper trenches in each of your business unit areas to develop your own ETL, you develop your own pipelines, develop your own reporting. And what does that do for the enterprise BI? And then I was like, well, actually it simplifies it, because we would just take those curated final tables of these different areas of the organizations and plug into them to combine data sets across the organization in our pipelines, right? Because our goal would be combining data sets from different areas of the organization. And Fabric actually, I think, enables that even more, because those business units and those data professionals are the owners of the source information.
Yes.
And we would be just sourcing from the particular areas to combine and continue to extend or combine across the data sets. Because like ultimately enterprise BI is about taking disparate data sources regardless of where they are. And a lot of times it's in third-party systems, right? So in this case, it's like, hey, if finance goes through the exercise of plugging into those third-party systems and pulling it into the Fabric ecosystem so that they can report on it, this is a really interesting challenge to like collectively bringing the data together, but ownership levels remain where they need without removing access to the data itself, which just fosters this kind of growth pattern that we've talked about of adoption. I think it speeds it up to some degree.
Well, I think I think I see where you're going here, but I think maybe there's a role missing with from the domain side. I think there's a domain member missing, because I think if I see where you're going with this, let's say I'm creating a lake house and I would have access to all the workspaces in a domain. Someone assigns me that. This is not what it is now, but kind of see where I'm going. And I want a shortcut from another workspace, like from another content in another workspace. Maybe I didn't know I necessarily had access to, where maybe that's kind of where I can kind of link together all the data that's relevant to me. Because again, right now, the only roles are, in a sense, from an assigning point of view, not necessarily from the access point of view.
The assigning access. So let me ask this question, because you guys are closer to this. Is there a concept of an Uber admin? Like there's an admin that sees across all the workspaces, or could be assigned across all the workspaces and have access to all the data.
A Fabric admin and the service principal that you assign to that. So
I think in most cases, yes, there's a Uber admin. The only time I would say you need to think or rethink that Uber admin type persona is when you're talking about regulated data spaces, financial, or
I hear you.
Or like there's like legal implications to some things about data that like there needs to be like there's an Uber admin of like everything else, but like there's like a handful of workspaces that are tightly controlled by process, and we need to know exactly who accessed things and stuff like that. So that's the only exception I can see that would be in my mind that would say, yeah, just there is an Uber admin for everything. But aside from regulation, that's the only piece.
Yeah, but it's interesting because at the same time, for as much as you would lock down those workspaces, you would either need to plug into that workspace or plug into those data sources to use data for other purposes, or reverse, it's such a lockdown workspace that it would have to have permissions into other areas to pull data into it.
I see. So
because you can't finance is not this silo that doesn't have to interact with other company data. You have to combine it. And I get like HR and finance are two areas where you have to be extremely diligent about who has access to some data, but to believe that those areas don't need access to other information from other groups is not accurate.
So what you're saying is the ability to, in a sense, go downstream, where I'm not saying this exists today, but you're saying having that ability to pull data from other workspaces, but they can't necessarily pull from you.
It's this theory of like, how does this ecosystem allow us to access the data we need to in whatever use case? Because there are many, right? We're diving into like more harder to define ones, but does it help with that or does it hurt? Because if all we're doing is digging deep trenches, this isn't doing anything except just unifying an experience where people can spend more money.
Yep.
where they, do their ETL.
I want to jump on your point there, because I think this is a great point. What I foresee happening here, and as I was thinking about these different areas, by bringing the Synapse world, by bringing pipelines, data factory, like all these other features into Fabric that can be now handled inside the workspace, looking at this going, okay, the business unit can now do more of their own data engineering. So, when we look at like the spectrum of data in a company, there is some things that are coming from enterprise systems, and maybe the role of that central BI team is now becoming less around building all of the cubes and the reports for the business unit. And now what's happening is we're seeing a shift in finding capable engineers, or even looking, the business, and my note I wrote down here was the business might actually start hiring their own data engineers to build what they need to build in the data engineering process. Yeah. But when I think about that note, I think looking at the cost of data, the majority of the cost of data is the people, the labor to get the pipelines built, to maintain the effort or the work. $5,000 a month for a P1 SKU to do a lot of things with data. You can do a lot with that P1 SKU. I mean, that's relatively cheap compared to the cost of an employee to design all the pipelines to make all that work. So I feel like what we're seeing here is we're now shifting the labor costs out of IT and bringing it into the business units a bit more.
You're not, but like you are and you aren't, right?
Well,
could it help out business units?
That's
Yes.
the goal, but
it also is your view on what is enterprise BI, because like say you do that, say you throw these additional users into the particular business units, great, then those business units get the value in that work stream. There's still two fundamental challenges that enterprise BI like solves. One is combining data sets from disparate parts of the system. I don't want disparate parts of the system, as long as we can, like, and this is where does the Fabric ecosystem bring it closer for me to access those things? Because one of the things we're very good at is combining data sets across the organization to produce the really deep insights that you would need across all those areas, primarily for extended leadership, for the leadership dashboards, for things that are driving company decisions. And does that always involve combining data sets? No, which is why I segment those out. Like,
no, agree.
ELT reporting and the combination of data.
I'm gonna disagree with you here slightly. I think
Okay.
Fabric. I agree with the fact that there's the central BI team understands those needs, and that might be a central role thing here. But when I look at what's happening now with Fabric, that doesn't necessarily have to be a role that's only serviced by the central BI team. The central BI team may be the team that says, hey, I'm going to go get all the Salesforce data and my other data. Yeah. Here's the tables of it. Oh, okay, here you go, business. Now you build the value from it. So to me, there's like that, the logic or the business logic of how we join internal data to Salesforce data, that may live in IT central BI, but I see an opportunity here for the business to own that. And now what happens is, this is where I think it becomes really important here, is because of that business unit to be able to own that information, there is a clear conversation that needs to happen now that says, okay, business unit, you own it. Therefore, you're responsible for it. So you have to give me an admin of so you don't just give this stuff away and say, here you go, have at it, go have fun. But you that comes with expectations. Like, if there's a problem, business unit, who do we call? Who's the solver of this issue? When there's
that's data ownership, though. Like, my problem with this is this.
But that could be given to the business.
No, you can't, because you're like the very things I defined for you as an enterprise problem that enterprise BI teams today solve, they are the ones that understand all these areas and collectively create objects that are infinitely more valuable. Just in general, can be infinitely more valuable than what a particular business unit does on its own, in its own third-party tool today, with Excel, with all these reporting. What happens is, as you matriculate all that up, extended leadership teams have to go, okay, I'm talking to finance, they have their own reporting. I'm talking to sales, they have their own reporting. I'm talking to marketing, they have their own reporting. I'd love to see all of how these things combine and come together to resolve these company objectives, not your business goal objectives. And the problem that you're introducing here with your theory of complete ownership by these business units is those differing teams would have to come together collectively to try to put together combined data sets. And I will tell you right now, it does not work. It will not work if you have completely independent teams that have to come together to combine data, to have their combined data sets. Who's going to manage it? Who owns that?
The question is,
we got to wrap.
I understand we got to wrap, but the question. So I would also challenge your when you say who owns that, it won't work. What's the main pushback for that? Is it the technology that's blocking you?
People. 100%.
Okay, so to me, that's a data culture issue, as opposed to the technology doesn't allow for it.
It's not. I will die on this hill. I will tell you through extensive experience that unless you have a team that owns something, these disparate
that's what I'm saying.
Lack of connected things are not. No.
But that's my point.
You're saying I have 10 teams that own something, and I'm saying bringing 10 teams together to combine the one thing without one team owning it does not work. It does not work.
And I'm going to add my 2 cents and then we'll wrap here because I'm kind of just to show.
I've got 5 more cents on this one, but go ahead, Tommy.
just to show.
I disagree on this one.
Is a week ago, me and Seth were going at it. I completely agree with Seth here because not only are you including the investment of Fabric, which the cost of Fabric, but now, according to you, Mike, you're also doing an investment of each business is now have to understand the technology. It's not.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, and that's not. But that's.
It's not their role. They don't care.
It's not necessarily their
not
role.
yet.
It's not just their role,
not
but
yet.
You have to now bring to the table.
I'm telling you,
you have to bring to the table to your CIO or your CEO saying, okay, you're going to invest all this in Fabric and we still don't know how much we're going to cost. But also now you have to bring in all these people to understand the technology and make it work the right way seamlessly with each
business
department.
units are already doing this. Like this is what I like.
No,
there's this theory and there's like what's really happening. Business units are already buying premium SKUs in their own department for just their needs. And they are like business units are already skilling up, knowledging up, and doing
that's why
all
they
these
call
things.
You and I, Mike.
Well, the business unit does this.
The one person who can make sense of it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
This is another podcast.
All right, it's another whole podcast. Okay. Oh, yeah. I'll just, for the record, I sorely disagree with your statement there, Seth. I think this is other issues that are going on here.
Since you and I have gotten into it. Let's do it.
Oh boy. Anyways, well, with this heated argument coming to an end, we thank you very much for your time. We appreciate everyone listening, and we really appreciate your listenership. If you have other disagreements with your IT organization, Central BI, or other leaders in your organization, please send them this podcast so you can also argue about this with your internal company as well. So no, don't do that. That's not a good idea. So our only request of this is if you don't mind, if you liked this content, if you like thinking about these kind of things, we really appreciate your listenership. Please share with somebody else who may be thinking about this as well. And also have a happy 4th of July. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast and we're available Apple and Spotify. Join us live on Power BI Tips channels, and we'll see you whenever we see you.
We'll see you again sometime in the future. Take care, and thank you all very much.